Picture this, it's March 2020. The world is shutting down. You're locked up in your Martha's Vineyard mansion with your husband of 20 years, your kids, a fireplace, and whiskey sours. Life is good, life is safe. Then the phone rings. A stranger tells you your husband has been having an affair. You confront him that night, he admits it. And when you wake up the next morning, the man lying next to you looks you dead in the eyes and tells you your marriage is over. No explanation, no apology, just done, like he's returning a jacket that didn't fit. A few days later, he comes back to the house to help tell your kids. And then he asks you to make him a sandwich. And she does. On the surface, that completely defies human logic. You're standing in the wreckage of your life, and your first instinct is to pass the mustard. But beneath the surface, that sandwich is actually the key to understanding everything we're exploring today. Welcome. Today we're unpacking Belle Burden's devastating memoir, Strangers, a memoir of marriage. And it really is devastating. But we aren't just running through a summary of a bad breakup. We're examining this story alongside a pretty formidable stack of clinical research. We're getting into the neuroscience of emotional dysregulation, the cognitive traps of rumination, and behavioral conditioning, specifically inhibitory control. The goal today is to explore the architecture of betrayal, the reality of a trauma response, and a central human conflict that I think honestly every single person listening has experienced at some point: the tension between compliance and agency, that agonizing push and pull between keeping the peace and actually standing up for yourself. So I want to ask you right now, have you ever found yourself doing something completely counterintuitive? Have you ever caught yourself making a perfect turkey sandwich for the person who just destroyed your life, just to feel like you have some grip on the wheel? Have you ever shrunk yourself, contorted your own boundaries, just to keep the peace in a room that was already on fire? It's a survival mechanism, and to understand the sandwich, we really have to understand the world it was made in. So let's go back to March 2020, because the contrast between the outside world and the inside world in this story isn't just background detail. It's the psychological foundation of everything that follows. The sheer terror of that moment is hard to overstate. We all remember the sirens, the empty grocery store shelves, wiping down cereal boxes with bleach. The entire globe is in existential panic. And Belle and her husband James, they retreat. They take their two youngest daughters, Evie and Carrie, and flee to their home on Martha's Vineyard, isolated, their favorite place in the world. And in the face of this global terror, James steps into the role of the ultimate hypervigilant protective patriarch. He sets up his home office on a card table, up at 4 a.m. obsessively watching the financial markets. But then in the afternoons, he's outside chopping 3 different kinds of wood, building gorgeous roaring fires, making Belle whiskey sours at sunset, because there were those early desperate rumors that whiskey would kill the virus in your throat. He's methodically locking every door and window at night, even though they're on an isolated island in lockdown. The threat isn't a burglar, it's an invisible pathogen, but he's locking the doors anyway. It's a fascinating display of the illusion of sanctuary, and it speaks volumes about how humans handle existential dread. When we face uncontrollable external threats, our instinct is to double down on our intimate attachments and our immediate physical environment. If we can't control the virus, we control the deadbolt. We seek complete safety in the familiar. Which brings us to this incredibly powerful symbol right on their property, the ospreys. For over a decade, James has been completely obsessed with a specific osprey couple that returns to their property every single spring. These birds migrate thousands of miles to South America or the Caribbean for the winter. They face storms, predators, all of it. And then they make this mathematically precise journey back to the exact same nest every single year. And this isn't a casual interest for James. He's deeply invested. He gets the kids involved, having them yell greetings at the sky when the birds first appear. He befriends the local osprey experts on the island. They even invite the family to watch them tag one of the birds. And they name the tagged osprey Belle, which is just wild foreshadowing when you think about it. The nest itself isn't some little bundle of twigs either. It's massive, over 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall, perched high above their property, a literal landmark of continuity. You can see exactly why a mind-seeking stability would latch onto that. That nest represents the perceived invulnerability of their 20-year marriage. It's a physical manifestation of reliability. The world might be falling apart, but the ospreys always return. The nest remains intact. For James and Belle, it's the ultimate symbol of the predictable cycle of nature and their life together, which makes the mundane reality of March 21st so incredibly jarring. It's the first night of spring. The Ospreys are back. Evie, their older daughter, is in the kitchen making fresh maki from scratch. James decides to roast a chicken on the outdoor grill. He's out there in the dark, meticulously keeping it at exactly 400 degrees. The chicken comes out perfectly. He carves it and gives the coveted oyster piece of the dark meat to their younger daughter, Carrie. It's just a portrait of pure domestic warmth, a family safe in their fortress, eating a beautiful meal while the world burns outside. The flawless performance of normalcy, maintained right up until the final second. Dinner ends. The kids go watch TV. James leaves the kitchen saying he has a work call, and Belle is left alone to clean up. She's in her pajamas, hair wet in a bun. She fills a bucket with warm water and white vinegar to mop the floor, that sharp smell of vinegar hanging in the air. Then her phone rings. It's glowing on the kitchen island. She doesn't recognize the number, so she lets it go to voicemail. A minute later, she listens. She hears a young, nervous man's voice. He takes a breath and says, "I'm sorry to tell you this, but your husband is having an affair with my wife." It's the ultimate intrusion. The invisible threat didn't come from the virus outside. It was already inside the house. But what's truly revealing here is Belle's immediate internal reaction. And when I read this, it completely stopped me. It's a textbook example of cognitive misattribution. Earlier that evening, Belle had taken off her diamond wedding ring and dropped it into a little glass jar of jewelry cleaner because a friend had told her the virus could hide under the settings of rings. So as she's standing there listening to this life-destroying voicemail, her fingers are bare, and her first instinctual thought is, did taking off my wedding ring cause this? It sounds irrational, but neurologically it's actually a brilliant defense mechanism, and that's exactly what we're going to dig into next. When an individual faces a sudden, catastrophic, and completely illogical trauma, the brain goes into a state of hyperarousal. It frantically attempts to assign causality. We need the world to make sense. Believing that a random, terrible event happened for absolutely no reason, or worse, that the person you trusted most has been deceiving you, is terrifying. It means you have zero ability to predict threats. So the brain searches for a reason it can control, even an irrational one. It's a subconscious attempt to regain agency. If I caused this by taking off my ring, then the world still operates by rules of cause and effect. It's like the emotional equivalent of a sinkhole. The ground just gives way, and instead of blaming the earth, you immediately wonder if you stepped down too hard. It's almost like a phantom limb sensation. Your brain frantically trying to assign logic to a sudden amputation. You feel the pain and think, I must have moved my leg wrong, even though the leg is gone. That's the universal guilt reflex. For victims of sudden betrayal, it's actually easier in that acute moment of shock to blame yourself than to accept the horrifying reality. That your partner is the architect of your destruction. Accepting their guilt means accepting your own vulnerability. So, reeling from this, Belle leaves the mop bucket, goes out into the hallway, and finds James coming down the stairs from his work call. He guides her into the guest room, sits her down on the edge of the bed, and takes her hands. And this is where the story takes a massive pivot. Because our cultural expectation is that the cheating husband grovels. He begs. He cries. But the reality of James's reaction shifts this entire story into psychological thriller territory. He doesn't grovel at all. He admits to the affair, sure, but his framing of it is clinical, detached, and bizarrely abstract. He tells her it meant nothing. He says it was just this attraction, and as he's saying this, he literally pulls his hands away from Belle's, holds them up in the air, and cups his fingers, spreading them wide like he's holding a basketball, to demonstrate the physical force pulling him and this much younger woman together. He describes it like physics, like gravity, like he was just a passive object caught in a tractor beam. What you're witnessing there is a real-time physical manifestation of externalizing responsibility. By describing the affair as an unavoidable physical force, he's stripping away his own agency from the betrayal. He's telling Belle and himself that he isn't a man who made a series of deliberate, deceitful choices. He didn't actively lie every single day. He's simply a victim of this irresistible magnetic pull. And that's a deeply ingrained step in cognitive dissonance reduction. James has an internal self-image of a good, protective father and husband. His actions directly contradict that. That dissonance causes psychological pain. So to resolve the pain without taking accountability, he has to rewrite the narrative, shift the blame to the cosmos, to attraction, so he doesn't have to view himself as the villain. And as if that isn't baffling enough, the crisis escalates. Belle texts the man who left the voicemail, the husband of the mistress, asking how long this has been going on. He texts back saying his wife just attempted suicide by swallowing sleeping pills. She's in an ambulance, which introduces an immediate catastrophic secondary trauma, and psychologically it completely upends the emotional hierarchy of the room. Belle stumbles out and finds James in the hallway on his cell phone, talking to the mistress in the hospital. He has his hand cupped over his mouth, speaking softly, hunching over, looking deeply caretaking. He tells Belle the other woman is going to be fine, and Belle is just standing there with this sickening realization. She is the one who is supposed to be falling apart. She is the wife whose life was just revealed to be a lie. Yet this other woman's extreme action has successfully captured all of James's attention and sympathy. It's a profound example of misplaced sympathy and emotional triangulation. In a bizarre way, the mistress's suicide attempt gives James an emotional out. It allows him to step into a caretaking, heroic role for her, completely bypassing the messy work of comforting his devastated wife. He gets to be the worried savior on the phone rather than the guilty perpetrator in the room. He sidesteps accountability entirely. So Belle spends the entire night awake, physically sick with dread. She finally creeps back into bed as the sky gets light, and at exactly 6 a.m., the bedroom door opens. James walks in, but he isn't the husband who went to sleep. He is fully dressed in heavy boots and a black winter parka, carrying a large canvas tote bag. Belle specifically describes his eyes as icy and narrowed, an expression she had literally never seen in 2 decades of marriage. And he coldly announces, "I've decided I want a divorce. I'm leaving." He's going back to New York to check on the other woman. He doesn't apologize. He just looks down at Belle, who is 50 years old, and says, "You'll be fine. You're still young." And he walks out. That overnight shift from the man roasting a chicken to this detached stranger is deeply chilling. How does a human being just flip a switch like that? How do 20 years evaporate overnight? To understand that, we need to get into the clinical research on the temporal dynamics of emotion regulation, specifically a groundbreaking study from the Ochsner lab at Columbia University. They used fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, to track what happens inside the brain when we regulate or suppress intense emotion. They looked at how people cognitively reappraise negative memories. In the scanner, subjects were shown intensely negative images or asked to recall traumatic memories, and they were asked to do one of 2 things: either immerse themselves in the memory, really feel the pain, or distance themselves from it. View it as an objective observer. Imagine it's happening to a fictional character, so they're told to dissociate on command. And here's what happens inside the brain. The fMRI tracks the bold signal, blood oxygen level dependent change, showing where blood is rushing in the brain. When subjects immerse themselves, their amygdala, the brain's primitive alarm bell for raw emotion, lights up like a Christmas tree. But when they distance themselves, the temporal dynamics completely shift. Blood flow surges into the prefrontal cortex, the logic center, the brake pedal, the prefrontal and cingulate control systems engage massively, and as they light up, the activity in the amygdala is actively forcefully suppressed. The logical brain is essentially throwing a heavy blanket over the emotional brain. It takes tremendous cognitive effort, but humans can literally will their brains to turn off the emotional resonance of an event. So James, standing there in his heavy boots at 6 a.m., is running a real-time distancing protocol on his own marriage. What Belle perceives as an inexplicable personality transplant is actually a massive mobilization of his cognitive control regions. He is engaging in severe emotional distancing to protect his ego structure, because if he immersed himself, he'd have to see her pain. He'd have to admit he is the villain. That level of cognitive dissonance is intolerable, so his brain applies a neurological tourniquet. He detaches completely, reframes 20 years as something he can just walk away from with a canvas tote bag, and when he tells her she's still young, that's not a comfort to her. That's a comfort to him. Minimizing her pain minimizes his guilt. He's rewriting the severity of the trauma. I really want you, the listener, to sit with the chilling nature of that indifference. We are talking about a partner deciding to simply abdicate their shared history. He leaves her completely alone on an isolated island during a pandemic, with 2 teenage daughters to manage. And later, he actually demands that Belle portray this to friends as a mutual decision. It's the ultimate assertion of psychological power. He dictates the reality. He unburdens himself of all the emotional fallout, leaving the wreckage entirely for her to clean up. Which makes me want to push back on something we hear all the time, this concept of closure. We're taught that closure comes from the person who hurt us, the tearful apology, the sit-down conversation. But what happens when that person has completely reset their reality? How do you find peace when the person who detonated your life refuses to acknowledge the explosion? When they look at the crater and say, "What crater?" The clinical research on trauma therapy struggles with this deeply. When the perpetrator experiences extreme narrative dissonance, the victim is left in profound disorientation. Your lived reality is denied by the person who co-created it with you. Closure cannot be extracted from them because they have deleted the file. It has to be manufactured entirely internally by the victim. And that is an agonizing process, which brings us to the moment that defines this entire story: the family meeting, the sandwich, the architecture of betrayal in full view. James is in New York. His boss finds out what happened and insists he can't abandon his family by text message. The boss actually loans James his private seaplane to fly back and tell his kids in person. So James arrives wearing an N95 mask, carrying an empty duffel bag. He gathers Belle and the daughters in the living room. He paces back and forth, staring at the floor, refusing to make eye contact. And he just bluntly says he hasn't been happy and they're getting a divorce. He completely omits the affair. Carrie collapses and wails. Evie goes completely stoic. The room is thick with grief. And then James stops pacing. He turns to Belle and he says, "I'm starving. Can you make me a sandwich?" It is agonizing. I wanted to scream when I read this, because she complies. Belle goes into the kitchen, hands shaking, and takes out artisanal sourdough bread. She toasts it perfectly, spreads Dijon mustard, layers fresh deli turkey, slices an avocado, and fans it out flawlessly. Adds tomato, sprinkles coarse sea salt, finds a pristine white plate with a bamboo rim and a blue flowered napkin. And while she's doing all of this, she's thinking, if I'm doing this, I'm going to do it well. Maybe if he sees this perfect sandwich, it will make him regret what he's throwing away. Why? Why does a 50-year-old woman, whose life has just been vaporized, whose children are sobbing in the next room, make a gourmet sandwich for the architect of that destruction? To understand this, we need to look at the research on inhibitory control, specifically these fascinating and slightly depressing studies done on preschool children, because what they reveal is how early this specific behavior gets ingrained in us. The research details a landmark study observing 4- and 5-year-old children using what's called the disappointing gift paradigm. A 4-year-old girl is promised a wonderful prize for completing puzzles. She's vibrating with excitement. The researcher hands her a brightly wrapped box. She tears it open, and inside is a plain, boring wooden block, or adult tube socks. It's deliberately cruel. The researchers film her face, coding micro-expressions. They're looking for forced smiles, mumbled thank yous, eye contact, versus dropping the toy or saying flat out, "I don't want this." They're testing whether the child will lie to protect the adult's feelings, mask her genuine disappointment to be polite. It's a test of inhibitory control. They also used a secret-keeping task and a forbidden toy task. And consistently, from a remarkably young age, humans are conditioned to prioritize social harmony over authentic emotional expression. And statistically, this conditioning is applied much more heavily to young girls. Girls are praised for being accommodating and sweet. They learn that their anger is a threat to their attachments. So they develop massive inhibitory control. They learn to swallow the scream and say, "Thank you for the wooden block." Belle the Good, that's what she calls herself in the book. In that kitchen, she is running the software of a 4-year-old girl handed a wooden block, utilizing decades of conditioned inhibitory control. Her world is collapsing, But she falls back into the deepest behavioral groove she has, the accommodating, polite, peacekeeping wife. It's the only script she knows. And there's magical thinking layered on top of it. The idea that perfect avocado placement might pierce his cognitive dissonance. It's a desperate grab for agency through acts of service. If she can't control his decision, she can control the sandwich. It's like watching a house burn down, and the arsonist asks you to fetch him a glass of water, and you actually pour it, and you make sure it has ice. That's the freeze and fawn response. And while Belle is in the kitchen attempting to keep the peace, what is James doing with the time she's buying him? He takes his perfectly crafted sandwich, goes straight down to the freezing basement, ignores his crying children, and starts aggressively tearing through storage boxes with a box cutter, searching frantically for their missing prenuptial agreement. That empty duffel bag is waiting for it. The juxtaposition is staggering. Upstairs, nurturing compliance. Downstairs, calculated aggressive financial extraction. The sandwich is a metaphor for a lifetime of ceding control, and nowhere is that loss of control more terrifying than in the financial reality Belle is about to slam into, because that missing prenup is the ghost haunting the entire marriage. Before their wedding, Belle's lawyer drafted a fair prenuptial agreement. Joint assets would be shared. But James felt insulted. He framed it as a lack of trust, pressured her to change it so that only assets explicitly in joint names would be split. And against her lawyer's frantic advice, she caved, to appease him, to prove she trusted him. And now, 20 years later, he wants it enforced to the letter. He wants the millions in marital money he conveniently kept in his name alone. So after James finally leaves the island, Belle becomes obsessed with finding this document. She goes into that freezing basement and spends 6 solid hours there, taking a box cutter, slicing open every single box, and meticulously resealing them with fresh tape so he won't know she looked. She describes herself covered in dust, freezing, sweating with panic, admitting that if she found it, she would have burned it in the fireplace. This frantic behavior is a visceral example of the rumination trap, covered heavily in the clinical research on repetitive negative thinking. Rumination is a cognitive process of continuously replaying a distressing situation without ever finding a resolution. An endless loop. The emotional enormity of what happened to Belle is too massive to process all at once. It's like drinking from a fire hose, so her brain narrows its focus and fixates on a tangible artifact, the prenup, something she can touch, a proxy for the emotional betrayal. The research on internet-delivered cognitive behavioral therapy, ICBT, highlights how rumination traps individuals in a thought-feeling behavior cycle. By obsessively searching, Belle is engaging in behavior that provides a false illusion of control. Her brain thinks, if I find the paper, I can destroy it. I can protect myself. But it actually deepens her distress. Every box she opens reinforces the threat. Rumination without resolution keeps the body flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, and we see those physical consequences. A friend visits her on the island, a man who suffered from severe depression himself, and he takes one look at Belle, pacing frantically, losing weight, not sleeping. He tells her, "You're in fight or flight mode. Your mind is looking for danger everywhere. This is a trauma response." Her brain thinks she's being hunted by a predator, but the predator is an impending legal battle. And I want to emphasize a core lesson that runs through this entire memoir. Financial dependence is vulnerability, period. Ceding financial knowledge creates a profound power imbalance. Belle let James handle everything because he liked doing it, and she wanted to keep the peace. She traded autonomy for convenience, and when the switch flipped, that trust was weaponized. It forces a brutal transition. When you're happily married, the operating system is we. We earn, we spend, we decide. But when a punitive prenup gets activated, it shatters that shared reality and reverts from we back to a highly adversarial I versus you. If you haven't been financially informed, you're walking into a battlefield blindfolded, so she's reeling from betrayal, terrified of financial ruin. Because society has a very clear script for death, people know what casseroles to bake, but there's no societal script for a sudden dramatic divorce. Belle runs into an acquaintance in the baking aisle and confesses what James did. The friend's eyes fill with tears and she just says, "That fucking asshole," which is precisely the unfiltered validation Belle needs. It cuts through the polite ambiguity. But contrast that with the men at her country club, literally turning around and walking in the opposite direction. It connects to the sociology of social contagion. Unconsciously, they fear that acknowledging Belle's collapse might shine a light on their own fragile relationships. Divorce is treated like a contagion. But then a famous professional athlete stops his bike, crosses the street, and offers genuine condolences. He uses his social capital to validate her. Her friends become pre-dawn lifelines. They act as reality anchors because Belle is dealing with relentless gaslighting from James. A little while later, he sends Belle a text about the afternoon. That was a great visit. Narrative rewriting taken to its most chilling extreme. It's like being the only person who can see a monster in the room, setting the curtains on fire. And the monster sends a postcard saying, "Love the interior design." And realizing that James will never validate her reality becomes the turning point. She cannot wait for closure. She has to actively reclaim her own narrative. Healing is active. It starts small. She's obsessed with turning the step tracker bars on her phone from red to green, regaining bodily agency. Then she tackles the finances, refinance the mortgage, untangle 20 years of taxes. She comes to value that autonomy more than the comfortable ignorance she lost. The new Belle demands transparency, takes ownership of her survival, and strips James of his power over her future. She writes an incredibly raw essay about James leaving her. She refuses to hide. She submits it to the New York Times Modern Love column, and they publish it. By publishing it, she dismantles James's control over the narrative. She forces the ugly truth into the light, shedding the shame that belonged to him all along. She digitizes old family home movies. She realizes the happiness in those videos was real. James destroyed their future, but he did not poison their past. Which brings us to the final scene. October 2020. Belle is walking down a street in Brooklyn. Suddenly, a man yells her name. It's James. Belle smiles, gives a small wave, and keeps walking forward. She doesn't engage on his terms. The invisible tether is broken. Think about the sandwiches you are currently making. Are you performing acts of compliance just to keep the peace? What would happen if you just put the bread down?